So this is the book in question. It's The History of Bestiality by Jens Bjørneboe, a trilogy published between 1966 and 73, and it's one truly Norwegian classic. I actually bought this book 4 years ago when I started doing YouTube, decided that I have to read this quickly, didn't do that, but earlier this month I made a video where I said to myself that this year will be the year, and I do not regret having read it. So in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and why I do not regret picking it up. It's said that this book took 25 years in the making, and it's basically about a guy that wants to write the history of bestiality. There are 3 different books, and in each book you meet this guy with 3 different names. He's on 3 different continents, and for me the only reason I could say that it's the same guy is because he's still the person that wants to write the history of bestiality. Each of the books has a time frame, it seems, but you could also get thrown in and out of that time frame. So suddenly a real historical figure can be fictionalized into the story at some point, and without it feeling confusing, which I find odd. It's difficult to try to explain what kind of read this is. It's not fact, it's not fiction, and at times it's difficult to tell. So we have a lot of historical figures, and then there's this guy trying to write a story, and we don't know a lot about him, but he can meet historical figures, and like that's fictionalized that he meets these figures, but then he can go on and talk about what these historical figures did in a specific region of the world. And I found it to be quite impressive that this wasn't messing with my head too much. I could still be engaged with the story without doubting the plot. There isn't really a plot here, but I didn't doubt the story even though he threw me in and out of fiction and fact a lot. To try and sum that point up, it has no clear storyline. You don't always know what is real and what is not real, and you sort of feel like you get to know more and more about the main character without actually knowing him as the story progresses. Since it's 3 books, it's quite a chunky one when they're all combined into this one. It's about 600 pages, but I found those pages to fly on by when reading it. I have always been kind of fascinated by people doing evil stuff. So what makes people do evil stuff? And if you like those themes, this is a great book for you. I've read several books from concentration camps earlier, and I don't know, there's something fascinating about how people can do extreme stuff, I guess. So that's probably why I did enjoy parts of this book, even though some parts are gruesome to read about. But it's sort of, if you've watched the news and read any historical books from before, you know how evil people can get. So this is more of a philosophical thing. To me, at least. I think that's the biggest surprise. It's not often that I read books where I can read sentences, stop and just think about them and really dive into the sentences and try to think about it. Because that happened a lot during this read, and yeah, as I said, that doesn't really happen that often, which is one of the biggest compliments I can give a book, I guess. What immediately happened when I opened this book was that I thought of Karl Ove Knausgård. I read his books 2 years ago, and there's something about the first-person narration combined with the self-confidence in the writing that really resembles Knausgård, to me at least. When I typed the English title of this book into the search engine on my computer, the first thing that came up was an interview with Karl Ove Knausgård from The Guardian, where he says that this book is the book that changed him as a teenager. And I felt an enormous pleasure in like a cred point system. I felt like I got all the cred points for thinking about Knausgård when opening this book the first time. There are similarities, I just can't pinpoint them. There's something about, I would call it kind of a smugness. If you're very sure about a thing and you write it in the way that you feel 100% sure that this is correct, there you have those two. Maybe I feel that some authors might not be self-confident enough to write this way. At the same time, where I couldn't stand to live with a person that writes in that way. But that's me. I do not like to argue with those kinds of people. Always. Sometimes. Reading the history of bestiality, I was constantly also reminded about this one, When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. So the reason being that this is a descent into madness kind of story, and some of it's real and some of it's not. And as you progress through the story, it increases in the realness. So that's an aspect I enjoyed. With the history of bestiality, it's said that the more you progress in that story, it gets more real to the author, or the author reveals more of himself in the story, which I found to be interesting, and I sort of wished that I knew that before I started reading it. Even though I really enjoyed the story, that could have further enhanced my experience, I guess. I think what surprised me the most when reading this story is how many times I actually laughed out loud. It's not a funny novel, but there are moments where the author sort of understates things a lot in a very, I would say, Nordic/Norwegian kind of way. Talking about genocide and trivializing it a bit to make a point, I found that to be quite funny. I wish that I had noted myself some examples of this, because now it just seems kind of crazy. But if you read it, you might understand what I mean. It has it's a very melancholy type of humor, a dark sense of humor, but I would say humor. At least I laughed. Probably not all people would laugh at those instances, but I laughed. I guess the saddest thing about reading this novel, and any novel like it, is how much things stays the same. So the last book was published in 1973, and we still experience and go through much of the same stuff that he discussed in the novel. And you can't really say ever that someone predicts the future, because sometimes, or most of the time, the future is, well, too easy to predict in some sense. And that is sad. But still, it feels like he really understood how things worked. And as I mentioned earlier, the thing where he got me to think about stuff in a different way and really made me reflect is the biggest kudos I could give this book. I was really not prepared to like a Norwegian classic this much in 2025, and it's still January, so I'm pretty happy with that. And it got me thinking that since Knausgård liked this book when he was about 15 or 16, I guess, maybe I should go back and revisit what books he read at that time, because that is impossible. That is possible. And yeah, maybe I'm at the reading level he was when he was 14. So there might be some tips for me there. Probably a lot of Norwegian classics in that reading pile as well. But yeah, have you read this book? If you have, please comment below what you thought about it. If you have another Norwegian classic you want me to read and review, please also leave a comment about that. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!